There was a time in this land when a man measured his worth not by the coin in his pocket, but by the steadiness of his hand and the reliability of what hung at his side or rested across his saddle. The American frontier was not a forgiving place. It asked hard questions of every soul who rode into it, and it demanded honest answers. Among the most practical of those questions was this: when you swung into the saddle and pointed your horse toward the horizon, where did you carry your guns, and how quickly could you reach them when the land turned against you? That question was not born of vanity or the desire for spectacle. It was born of necessity. The working horsemen of the frontier era faced threats that were as varied as the terrain itself. Predators circling a herd in the small hours before dawn, hostile encounters in open country far from any settlement, the sudden violence that could erupt without warning along trails that no lawman regularly patrolled. A firearm carried poorly was nearly as dangerous as no firearm at all, and so the men who rode those trails, season after season, developed systems of carry that were tested not on paper, but in the unforgiving schoolroom of lived experience. The saddle scabbard was among the oldest and most trusted of those solutions. Fashioned from heavy leather, shaped and hardened to receive the stock and barrel of a rifle or carbine, the scabbard mounted to the saddle rigging, most commonly along the left side, with the butt of the weapon angled forward and the muzzle pointing down and to the rear. It was a deceptively simple arrangement, and its simplicity was precisely its virtue. The firearm rode with the horse, not with the man. On long journeys across open range, journeys that stretched not for hours but for weeks, this distinction was of genuine consequence. Every pound removed from a rider's body was a mercy rendered to both man and horse over the accumulated miles. The security of the scabbard was equally valued. A rifle seated firmly in a well-fitted leather boot did not shift, did not fall, did not announce itself with the clatter and rattle that might unsettle a horse or betray a man's position in uncertain country. Through river crossings, through dense brush, through the hard riding that attended the management of frightened cattle, the long gun remained where its owner had placed it, ready to be called upon when circumstances required. That readiness, however, came with a condition. The scabbard served the dismounted man with admirable efficiency. A rider who stepped from his horse drew his carbine in a single fluid motion and addressed whatever demanded his attention had at his disposal a weapon of reach and power that the revolver could not match. But the man who remained in the saddle and needed his rifle quickly found the scabbard a slower instrument than circumstances sometimes allowed. To reach downward, to find the grip of a weapon secured against the horse's shoulder, to draw it clear while the animal moved beneath you. This was a task requiring deliberateness and composure that the urgency of certain moments did not always afford. For this reason, the sidearm carried on the person occupied an entirely different place in the frontier horseman's thinking. The revolver was the weapon of the rider in motion, the weapon of the man who could not dismount, the weapon that answered immediately when immediately was the only acceptable answer. It rode on the belt, close to the hand, subject to no intermediary of scabbard or saddle leather. When threat appeared, the hand dropped, the fingers closed, and the iron cleared the holster by the most direct route available. The manner of that carry, however, was governed by considerations that the uninitiated might not appreciate. The horseman who wore his revolver on the strong side of his hip found, in the saddle, that the architecture of his own equipment worked against him. The saddle horn, the pommel, the press of his own thigh against the horse's flank, all conspired to make a strong side draw an awkward and encumbered affair. The experienced rider knew better. He wore his revolver on the weak side, butt angled forward, in what was called a cross-draw arrangement. The arm swept naturally across the body, the hand met the grip at an angle that the saddle did not obstruct, and the weapon came free with the economy of motion that the strong side draw on horseback could rarely equal. The revolver thus carried was a weapon of close and immediate application. Its chambers were limited in number, its effective range modest by comparison with the rifle. But these were not failings. They were simply the honest nature of the instrument. At the distances that most confrontations on horseback actually occurred, the revolver was entirely equal to its purpose. It could be wielded with one hand while the other managed the reins. It could be brought to bear quickly in any direction without requiring the rider to abandon control of his mount. It was, in every sense, a horseman's weapon. The wisdom that emerged from long experience on the frontier was not to choose between these two arrangements but to employ them together as a unified system. The scabbard held the long gun, patient, powerful, reaching, available for the moment when the rider could dismount and address his situation with deliberation and range. The hip holster held the revolver, immediate, manageable, demanding nothing of the rider that the saddle and the moving horse would not permit. Each answered what the other could not. Together they constituted a form of readiness that the frontier, in its unsentimentality, respected. Those who served in capacities beyond ordinary trail work, men charged with the keeping of order in remote territories, scouts riding the margins of settled country, riders whose duties placed them regularly in the path of danger, refined these arrangements further still. Shorter firearms in the scabbard sacrificed some range but rewarded the mounted man with a faster draw when urgency demanded it. A second revolver, worn to mirror the first, ensured that a man was never left without recourse should one weapon fail, or his strong hand be otherwise occupied. These were not affectations. They were the considered conclusions of men who could not afford to learn the same lesson twice. The frontier asked of every man who rode it a quality that might simply be called preparedness. Not the anxious, watchful preparedness of the fearful, but the quiet, practiced readiness of those who had studied their circumstances honestly and arranged themselves accordingly. The saddle scabbard and the belt holster, taken together, were an expression of that quality. They were the answer that experience had given to the question the land kept asking. And the men who rode with both, who understood the purpose of each and the limitation of neither, were the ones best fitted to meet whatever the open country placed before them.